Welcome to Gut Punch, the podcast that explores life-changing moments. Hosted by Kathryn Lancioni, a seasoned educator with personal insights into resilience. Kathryn shares how life can change in an instant, shaping our path forward. Each episode features inspiring guests who face their own gut punch moments. Guests share their journeys through loss, upheaval, and triumph. What to expect: honest conversations, lessons in resilience, inspiration for growth. Join Kathryn as she highlights courage and perseverance in every story. Gut Punch is a reminder that there is always a path forward. Be part of the conversation. Register now to join Kathryn for today's journey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Kathryn Lancioni, and I'm the host of Gut Punch. This afternoon, we're joined by 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝘀𝗍𝗲, who is a working professional, a mother, a wife, an artist, and also someone who suffered a pretty incredible gut punch. 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝘀𝗍𝗲, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and just tell you, honestly, it's a true pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Kathryn. Great to be here.
So, 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝘀𝗍𝗲, before we talk about the gut punch, why don't you share a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of where life was before the gut punch?
I was raised in a very idealistic, creative family. Dad was an apprentice to Frank Lloyd Wright. Mom was the first person in her family, let alone to get a college degree or master's in early childhood. I always created. I was a creative person from day one, crawling around, doing art. I went to art school, came out of art school, and one of my oldest friends in the world, we met in kindergarten, was my friend Gary. Gary and I grew up together. We adventured together in his little red Volkswagen Bug. We were all over the place and very close. Everyone thought we were going to get married, but we were almost closer than that. We had a soul connection. And through the years, long story short, when I turned 50 and my daughter was going into middle school, I knew I needed to find a business that had flexibility for me so I can be there for her. And that is when I started my tutoring business, which I've had for 13 years. Long story short, I still do art, working on an art show, working on a book about my Gary, which is what I'm going to talk to you about as well, which was part of my gut punch as well as his gut punch as well.
So, yeah, and I should say that 𝗘𝗽𝗃𝗍𝗃 owns one of the Tutor Doctor franchises here in North Jersey. And also has an incredible website. 𝗘𝗽𝗃𝗍𝗃, what's your art website?
Beyond the Eye Art.
Yeah, and everybody should definitely check it out. It's great stuff. So, 𝗘𝗽𝗃𝗍𝗃, let's talk more about the gut punch and what happened and when it happened.
So it was around 1990, actually. I was running an art gallery in Alexandria, Virginia. And Gary was a drug and alcohol counselor in northern Westchester, Dutchess County, New York. Gary was always a very strong swimmer. And his mom had a place down at LBI, Jersey Shore. He was out swimming. It was Labor Day weekend, and he should not have been swimming. And he was caught in a riptide, pulled into the ocean, and then thrown into the shore and broke C5, C6 vertebrae. And I have been connecting a lot with his sister recently as I'm formulating the whole concept of writing his story. And she was there. And she remembers looking down at him and him saying, "I can't move." And that sort of started. He was heliported to Philadelphia, to Jefferson Hospital, into the neurological center there. I was in Alexandria. I drove up. That happened Saturday. I drove up on Sunday, and he was in a complete halo and had become a quadriplegic. He could only move from here. By Tuesday, he had had a brainstem stroke and never spoke again. So we communicated with him. We learned to communicate through a lucite letterboard that had the letters on it, and we spelled out words with his eyes.
Wow. So mentally, he was fine. It was just
100% fine. I mean, had a trauma of, what happened, but his brain, everything, his spirit, his soul was him. It's just his physical body from here down was completely never functioned again.
So you get that call that he's in the hospital, and what happened? And what were
I drove up there. I'm the type of person where something happens, I'm there for somebody. I'm there 150%. Drove up there, and we went from him almost silent screaming, spelling out, "Get me Kevorkian." He just didn't want to continue on. And that was the initial gut punch, I think, for him. and for me. And to be
Yes.
honest, the next 6 years of his life were the learning process of how he and we handled it.
How did it make you feel? Like someone who you emotionally connected with, he was your person in so many ways, intellectually and emotionally. And suddenly the only way he can communicate is with a lucide tablet. Like,
We were so close that I almost knew what he was thinking, but it was
okay.
painful. I felt his anger, his pain. It wasn't as much anger as when his life went on. He became very, very angry, and sometimes when you went to see him, he would just shut down because he
Wow.
was so angry at how he was treated in the outside world, in a hospital, in his nursing homes, wherever he was. They didn't see him as a person. He was no longer a
Right.
person. He was a body, and he was absolutely still a person. And it was, I think, when things like that, traumatic things happen for me, I just try to be there for the person as much as I can and sort of process it later.
So you processed it later. It impacted you later. How did it impact you, do you
I
think?
think along the years of what happened to him, as when he left the hospital. He was a quadriplegic. He never spoke again, and he went from place to place. I think he went to Helen Hayes Hospital, which was amazing. But this was in like 1990, 1991. So the technology of what could help him was just being created, really.
Right.
But before that, he was a Methodist minister at the New Canaan, Connecticut Methodist Church. He had a very, very strong congregation there who loved him dearly. So when he was at Helen Hayes, there was a technology person there who did all this research and found this wheelchair that had a voice synthesizing computer connected to it. And his incredible congregation was able to raise funds to get that for him. That
Wow.
opened up a whole learning for him of communication through this technology. But it was still a challenge for his body, because he was starting to slowly atrophy. But he was so fortunate to get this and then have to learn how to use this computer. But it was a process. The whole thing was a process of trying to communicate because he was stuck in a
Yes.
in a brain and a mind that was 100% functioning and wasn't able to communicate what was going on inside rapidly. Once you had to learn, you learned how to communicate with him, but it was frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, how did you, again, this is someone that you confided in, spoke to, laughed with, cried with, and then he can listen, he can understand, he can hear you, all that kind of good stuff, but he can't respond. How tough was that on you
It was
personally?
very it was very tough. But to me, that I'm the type of person, when something happens, you just have to be there for the other person and
Right. Right. You're
put my
selfless.
own stuff aside. But it was a process. It was a process. And I
Yeah.
think the process that he went through and his family went through was a similar process of just how do you adjust to keeping that person who was so special in your life, still communicating with him and being there for him and processing your own stuff of what happens.
And so here we are. When did Gary pass? What year?
1996. He lived for 6 years, and by the way, he married my husband and
Oh, wow.
because we always said if either of us ever get married, it has to be him who's going to marry. And he wrote the sermon on his computer. He learned how to type like this.
Wow.
Yeah, and he wrote it, and the voice synthesizing computer said part of it, and my brother said part of it. It was a remarkable thing, but I couldn't
What
see
a
it any
beautiful
other
story.
way.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. Oh, 30 years, um, next year.
30,
So what did you learn
oh my goodness,
from
a
Gary's
huge amount.
experience?
A huge amount. First of all, it's Gary's story, which is I'm going to tell in the book I'm writing right now about Gary, Messages from Gary. Gary was able to go from, silently screaming, "Get me Dr. Kevorkian," to, while he was in the last place he was in, Westchester, New York, nursing home, he was able to give back and counsel people. Someone that we had gone to high school with came in and he was actually counseling them
How?
because they were communicating through his iBoard, because that's the type
Wow.
of person Gary was. His spirit and his soul were so deeply true that was still alive in him, even though his body
Yeah.
wasn't, from
Right.
physical body. And that was so dramatically impactful to me and I think it's a message that people need to hear, which is why I'm writing the book. One of the main reasons of the why is the messages that not only just his life gave us, it has given me, but to be able to process, a lot of people don't believe this, but things happen for reasons. You say, why did this happen? This is Gary's message, and Gary's message is that he has told me in messages to me that I need to convey is you don't lose your spirit. You don't always lose your spirit and your soul. And when that's still there, that's who you truly are, whether you have a physical body or not. And that is very impactful to me. And that's why I
Oh, yeah.
believe that gut punch that we actually had went through and dealt with taught me what we truly need to value within ourselves, and that he was probably one of the most truly spiritual people that I've ever known over the years, because he was able to come back to who he truly was, and that is
Right.
a person to give back to other people.
I mean, it's an incredible story. How did it change you losing him?
It changed me tremendously. First of all, it took me a long time to realize, you look back and you say, what are the messages that you get from these types of traumatic experiences, or the gut punch that happens, and how do you grow
Right.
from it? Because I always look at, why did this happen? What is this supposed to teach me/us? It has changed me tremendously in that I look at everything. To me, there are no coincidences. And you learn from everything that happens to you, whether it's traumatic, you
Right.
grow from it in as many positive ways as you possibly can from it. But also I see things and I get messages from him. So I know that he's with me, and that's how I'm going to write his story. It's going to be a
through his
combination of both of us writing it together. And from my viewpoint of how it impacted me and the messages that I feel his life and story need to be told to the world, really.
So you're going to be basically, I mean, more of the a sort of combination of the narrator and the interpreter,
And from
interpreting
my
the
own
message.
experience as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
really what I'm trying to work on and identify now is the format, and
Yeah.
the why of what is the messages here. And these are the messages. These are the messages.
Do you feel like Gary's death impacted you in different ways during different times of your life? Because it's 30 years. It's not like
Yes.
it just happened last year, 2 years. It's 30 years. So as you've evolved as a professional, as an adult, as a woman, you feel so give me some examples of,
I think
in running the Tutor Doctor, for example, are there things that or do you view the business, or do you view things differently now about it that you
yes.
think are as a result of Gary?
Yes. Because I
Okay.
have that same desire to give back and help kids and help people that he does. We have that same, to me, that is one of my core values, is helping people.
Right.
And no matter what, you put your own stuff aside and you do what you have to do for other people. For me, I have a
Yes.
passion for kids, and however you can connect with them and relate to them. I think that's what really showed me that, yes, we have this connection. No matter what, we want to help people. And I think that's a big part of Tutor Doctor for me, is my passion of wanting to help kids academically, creatively, anxiety, having to do with academics, the whole process of learning to grow and become a better learner so that you can go into life as a strong and resilient young person.
Yeah. With your family, um, again, to lose someone who was so important to you, how did Gary's passing affect your relationships at home, on the home front, in any way?
Well, mom and dad, I'm going back, mom and dad, and I have some really wonderful pictures that I want to try to include in the book. Our home was sort of a sanctuary for Gary, because we had a very open and supportive and sort of out of the box upbringing. And Gary
Okay.
would sort of find sanctuary there because his family was not, So he would come over, and my mom was very cultured and very smart, and they would debate and have conversation. And it was a great place for us to connect with my family. But with my husband, I would say, I remember when we were married in 1995, the first Thanksgiving, I went to see Gary in the nursing home. And I'll never
Okay.
forget that it was the first time I ever saw my husband cry, was when we walked into that, and he doesn't cry. We
Right.
walked into that nursing home, and not just to see Gary, but to feel the people that things have happened to. However, if you're aging or if you have cancer, or Gary not being able to take care of himself, feeling that aloneness, and
Yes.
the importance to me of being there for him at a special time when families are together and families are, celebrating together or whatever. It was important for me to go see him. And I think Jack, my husband, had not felt that because his family was very unsupportive and not there for him. And that was really important to Gary and important for me. And I know very moving for my husband.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, I know from my own experience and talking to other guests, like it's the importance of community, right? It's
100%.
just community. Community goes such a long way in helping people navigate, these unexpected gut punches.
And from your own gut
I
punch,
do.
when you're
I
in the
do.
hospital and you're there laying there, to have community or someone there for you, to me, everything else gets put aside and you go.
Well, I remember, the worst time in any hospital is the weekend because there's no one around. Like there's no like if you're in rehab, like there's no PT that happens. You just lay there. I remember one day I woke up and I had no place to go, so it got so bad at one point that I had a sign on the outside of my hospital bedroom, and it said "Don't knock before 10 a.m." because there was no reason for anyone to wake me up. I didn't need to
Right.
have my blood drawn. I needed my vitals checked. And, I wake up 10, 11 o'clock. I'd have basically brunch. And the highlight of the day was rolling from one side of the bed to the other, or seeing like what crazy guest was on, if it was, Good Morning America or whatever. But yeah, it gets pretty boring.
And you want
And
people
knowing that
there, and it
having
shows
people
you
visit,
when a gut
yes,
punch like that happens, it shows you, because I had a very close friend who was unable to see him in the beginning. He was unable to deal with it. And I got angry initially about that. And then over
yeah,
the years, I've realized I shouldn't be angry at him because my priority is to be there for people. But he couldn't handle his own emotions. And that's okay. That's his own thing, but
yes.
for me, that's my priority, is to be there for people. And I know that if that had happened to me, Gary would have been there for me
Well, that's
100%.
right. You always hope that people will treat you the way that you would treat them or help them, that they will support you. But I've learned from my own experience, it's not always
Right.
possible because, it's always interesting when you go through, in your death experience to see who shows up and who doesn't.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Who
And
shows up
yeah, and some people
can't.
don't show up because they mentally
They
can't
can't.
do it. Others don't show up because they don't care, right? It's one of the two. But you can't, what I've learned, because this happened to me with some very,
Yep.
very close friends who showed up once I got out of the
Right.
hospital, but didn't come and visit me in the hospital. They
They
just
couldn't.
couldn't handle
And initially,
it.
I was angry about that. But
Yes,
over the years, I've realized that, and it may take time, that is where they were at. And
that's right.
that is who they are. And is that a weakness? Whatever it is, it's their own stuff,
That's right.
It's their own
That's right.
stuff that they have to deal with in their own journey through life. But that's not where I'm at.
Well, that's right. I mean, everyone chooses their own path, right? And their own course. My mantra has always been, before and after my whole thing has been like, I always try to treat people the way that I would like to be
Exactly.
treated. I'm a big believer in, giving forward. But not everybody's that
Right.
way. And that's okay.
But I was angry for a long time at him. It took a while for me to get to the place where it doesn't mean that he didn't care for him.
Correct.
Doesn't mean, it means like the people that couldn't show up for you until you got home,
Yeah.
To me, when something happens and you get a serious gut punch that happens for you, put your shit aside and be there for the person.
That's right. That's right.
To me, that's the
That's
bottom
right.
line. That's how I've always been. And that taught me even more so how important it was, not only for Gary, but for me to help me process it, is to be there and see the progression. And then what happened was, I'll remember, this was probably around 1996. He knew he was going to pass, because I think what his muscles around his lungs were atrophying so badly that, it's hard to breathe. He knew. And at that point, he was all scraggly, looking almost like Jesus with the long beard and the hair, and he said to me, "Get me Eugene." Now, Eugene is a friend who owns a hair salon still to this day in Yorktown, New York. And we brought
Okay.
Eugene in, and he's like, even to the end, he had an ego, which was and he was like, he wanted to be cleaned up. I knew it. I'd be damned if I'm going to lay there and people are going to look at me and I'm going to be looking all scraggly. And he wanted to be cleaned up because he knew he was going to go. And I think over the years, the learning process for me of the gut punch is what has brought me to wanting to help, to be an end of life doula and help people pass.
Yeah, so I talk to me more about that. I mean, one could say probably in many ways that it's something from Gary
100%.
that was the impetus for you. So talk to me about what that involves and your why. I mean, I know you want to give back to people, and I love that and support that. But what else? I mean, that's a tough job to actively step into.
I believe that it's a gift, that some people can do it, and I think I have that gift.
Yes.
And I've gone through it with Gary. I've gone through it with my mother, my father, my mother-in-law. A lot of people have passed. And I saw the woman who took care of my mother. It's an ability to give to people to the very end and help them learn to be okay with passing on,
Yeah.
and I look at death in a very specific way that other people may not. And that's okay. Everybody has their own vision of what death is, especially when you've been around it and you've seen the progression of death or a sudden death. I want to help people and hold space for them to be able to peacefully pass on and maybe do what I feel drawn to with my art and my creative being is let's do some creative projects, end of life projects where you can give something to your family as a memory of you
Yeah.
or create something, allow at least your creative energy to create something before you pass that your family, your grandkids, your whoever's can remember you by. I think it's a really beautiful thing and something that I want to do.
I love that. So I do have to ask you since you brought it up. So how do you view death?
I view death to me, and this is a big part, I think, of what with Gary.
Okay.
It's the dying of a physical body. Your
Okay.
physicalness, your body that you have dies. Your soul and your spirit do not.
They live on.
Yeah. And I know they do because I can communicate with them. So I
Right.
know that. And that's evolved with me over time. And I saw Gary's body and his literal body atrophied, I mean, but he was still there 100,000,000%. And that's significant.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's a wonderful epiphany to have about, so much of it. Because I think when people pass, yes, we miss the physical being of them, but it's
Exactly.
more the ability to talk. I know I had a very close friend pass away, it's about 2 years ago, and he was older, he was 88. And I never saw him that much, but it was the ability to call and chat.
Yeah.
And, he'd give me like, it's just terrible about calling him, but he would call me every couple of weeks and he'd say, "Hey kiddo, what's going on?" And he was like, it was older than my dad. He was just a very, very, just a wonderful soul, Ira. And I didn't realize how much he meant to me until he
Yeah.
passed. And what has been hard, even today, 2, 3 years later, and even after what I've gone through, is I can't call
Right.
him, but I think about him. And, the other day I was sorting through a bunch of papers and I used to take him out to dinner, to lunch for his birthday. We always went. He was an old time New Yorker. So I would, pick your favorite place. And so the last time we celebrated his birthday was about a year after COVID was over. 2022, I guess it was. And we went to Tavern on the Green and we sat outside
Nice.
because, he was turning 87 and he was still very concerned about germs as he should be. And we had a wonderful, wonderful day. We took pictures, and he showed up in his top hat and
Oh,
his
that's
walking
great.
stick and his seersucker suit and just always had a big smile on his face. So I found the thank you note, his handwritten thank you note that he wrote me after that lunch.
Oh, I love
And it was so meaningful to find that. And it just reminded me of
Yep.
him. And, it kind of sort of, with your talk of Gary, it made me realize that he's still here. He's not physically here, but his spirit is here and mentally he's still here,
100%.
bringing me into shares. And it was so wonderful to find that. So, people do come in and out of your life in crazy ways. And I do agree with you that they all come for a reason. But I think that is the hardest thing, is when people, go to that next stage of life, is it's not the physical, it's not the physicality that we miss. It's the emotion, the intellect, the personality that we miss.
Right. Well, and the ability that he had, even after so much loss, physical loss, of still being able to get to a place where he can give back and help people.
Yeah.
That's, to me, a huge message.
Well, because what he went through physically, you have life and then you can't even talk.
And he was such a physically vibrant individual,
Yeah.
with an ego and a very strong personality. And yeah, you have to put your ego and your physicality aside, but you're still who you are. The essence of who
That's
he
right.
was. It took a while to get back to who, to evolve through the pain and the grief and letting go and everything. But yeah. And he was still angry, at how he was treated in nursing homes and places, because people didn't see
everybody
him.
is.
People didn't see him as a person.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother
That's a
conversation.
whole
I know,
other
based on
conversation.
what I went through.
Same
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
I don't know anyone that speaks highly of their hospital experience.
But that's also a message to healthcare providers and people, that whether you're laying there, they hear you, they know. They're people too, even though they may not be able to communicate. I mean, what a horror to be trapped in your mind and not be able to say, "Hey, I'm here. Hello."
Well, when I was in the coma,
Yeah.
my mind was very
Right.
active. And as you know, I heard things, I heard stories, and I remembered them when I
That's
woke
right.
up. I think I've shared this one with you, but the one that always makes me giggle when I tell it is, I remember when I was in coma that there was a male nurse who was talking about what he was going to do during the eclipse. And he said he was going to go to Lake Placid, he was going to ski, and he was going to smoke weed with his girlfriend. So I woke up April 3rd of 2024, and the eclipse was, a couple of days later. So he was gone, and he comes back. And with the little voice that I had at that point, I asked him, I said, "Well, how was it at Lake Placid? Did you guys have good skiing and, whatever?" And he looked at me
Yep.
and said,
How did you know?
Wait, yeah.
Yeah, well,
And I
hello,
was
I
like,
heard you.
you talked about it when I was in the coma. He's like, "I talked to you about a lot of stuff when you were in the coma." I'm like, "Yeah, also like the fried chicken at the hospital and how you hate it, right?" And he was like, "Oh my God, what else do you know?" I'm like, "Wouldn't you like to know?"
Exactly.
So yes, that will be my next book after my gut punch book, is stories from the coma, or the things you hear, because we always underestimate everybody around us, and that's so the wrong thing to do. And what's amazing to me about Gary is that he was someone who truly loved life, enjoyed life, about everything that you've told me, and kind of capitalized in every moment, and suddenly that opportunity or that ability is taken away from him. But he still managed to impact and help. And
it's funny that you brought up the cards, because recently, in speaking to his sister, who is like my sister, she showed me some cards that while he was in the nursing home, he was creating these cards that he would send out to people. And I only recently learned that there was a man, a spiritual man, who lived in the area, and I just connected with him literally yesterday. And he went in to see Gary and would help him and work with him on these cards. Gary would send out these cards, and it was a message. It was a message typically from this man who would go in, and because he's quoted he's written like 6 or 7 books. And I just recently learned about this. So we're still, even 6 years later, I'm getting little tidbits of information that put together how people that have helped him through dealing with a lot of the loss and the grief. And yeah,
it's incredible.
I just learned about it.
It's just like, I think you're going to continue to learn about it, because his spirit and his story keeps just
But it's like he's
evolving and
feeding me
growing.
little tidbits,
Yeah.
which is great,
Yeah.
because it's all coming together to help with the story. But
And the book is going to be called Messages from Gary.
I think so.
I love that. Well, Jessica, as always, absolute pleasure to chat with you today. I love the story.
And I
thank
love
you for
your
sharing.
story too.
Thanks. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of Gut Punch, and we look forward to talking with you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
That's it for today's episode of Gut Punch. I hope you found inspiration, because no matter how hard life hits, there's always a way forward. Make sure to follow or subscribe to Gut Punch on your favorite podcast platform. If you know someone who could use a little inspiration, share this episode with them. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay strong. See you in the next episode.